couple of years. I'm gonna restart this channel where I started this channel by remaking my eating disorder story video. I'm gonna be diving into some stuff on this channel now from the perspective of being recovered and super passionate about life again. I wanted to share my story with you in hopes that it shows you what's possible. I wanted to start by putting a slight trigger warning. I've tried to make this as least triggering as possible. There will be no flash imagery of emaciated bodies, but you know, it is triggering content. That is there. If you're in a really bad spot, this is your go away. The beginning. I was 14. No, I was 11. And my mother left. And I think that was the trigger point, that chaos. So a little bit of background about me. I was born in Scotland and I had an incredible childhood. I have 7 siblings. My parents are incredible. They were both, all through my childhood, always so present, so loving, so providing, so fun. And I just remember always having my parents. It was a blessed childhood. And I think that was actually part of the reason why it was so hard for me when I was 11 and my parents split up. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I had chaos. Just around about the time that I began to hit puberty, it just left me with a lot of questions that I had no one to ask. And I had to deal with all these changes in my body. I was suddenly growing boobs and my hips were filling out and I was getting puppy fat and I was hungry and I was hormonal and I was sad for no reason and then I was angry. And I didn't know what any of it meant, and I felt completely out of control. I thought, what can I control? It's my weight. I could control how I looked. I just wanted to be a bit healthier, but I did it wrong. I did it all wrong. I thought that eating healthy meant eating less, and so I lost quite a lot of weight quite quickly. My mother was panicking. She would make me come and eat food. It took a few months. I believe it was May of my 14th year. And my mum said, we're going to go to the doctor. And she did blood tests and she did my blood pressure and my temperature and all those standard tests. I think she talked to my mum in private and we went home and my mum said, you need to pack a bag. We're going to go to the local children's hospital. I had a tube and I had needles stuck in me and I had medication thrown at me and I was admitted onto a hospital ward and I hadn't been expecting it. I hadn't realized I was so ill. They refed me. In New Zealand, they don't really have residential eating disorders facilities, so they put you in the hospital, they refeed you, and then they refer you to outpatient therapist. My therapist was lovely, but quite incompetent. She didn't push me hard enough. She didn't self-motivate me, and there was a big focus on eating. Weight restoration, get your weight up, get your calories up, get your food up. At this point, I was just quite sick of it all. At this point, I don't actually think I actively had an eating disordered mind. I wasn't fully intentionally sick. I'd sort of accidentally gone too far into unhealthy weight loss, and then they'd put me in hospital. But it was actually in hospital that I sort of learned that, oh, I have this diagnosis of anorexia. What's anorexia? I looked up anorexia. And that's when I started to compare myself. So I actually developed anorexia behaviors after I was diagnosed with anorexia in order to better fit the diagnosis. So I had no motivation to recover because I didn't really realize I was that sick. But, you know, my therapist kept feeding me and I thought, you know, what the hell, let's just get this over with. When they tried to make me put on weight, I just sort of went, okay. And I ate, I stuck to my meal plan, I ate my meals, my weight went up. But my therapist didn't do anything for me mentally. She didn't address my mind. I gained weight and I actually gained more weight than she wanted me to, which is good because you're supposed to have a little buffer. It's like a safety weight so your body can be assured that you're okay. I went even beyond that and I kept gaining weight because my metabolism was so stuffed up from dieting that my body was just holding on to everything that it could get. I acknowledge now that it was a transition that I had to go through, but just feeling uncomfortable in my own skin was really not what I needed at that point. I didn't have any self-esteem and none of it was building. And in fact, my mind was getting sicker even though my body wasn't getting sicker, and so I started to lose weight again. On my birthday, I remember my parents making me this beautiful chocolate cake with berries and icing, and it was a family favorite recipe, and I was so scared to eat it, and it's so sad to think about now. And after my birthday, I remember going on holiday to my sisters, and she tried to help me. I tried to be okay, but my behavior started kicking in, and on holiday I was unsupervised, and I just very quickly went downhill. And as soon as I got back from that holiday, I plummeted. I nosedived, and I went back to hospital a couple of weeks later, and I was in hospital for, it would have been almost 2 months, something like that. It was just horrible, and still no focus on the mental side of things. It was all just feed you up and get you out. It was just a terrible place to be. Whatever you do, stay out of hospital. It's not glorious in any way whatsoever. It is horrible. I started to become institutionalized. I started to become comfortable in this hospital, because in the hospital they would give me food and I had to eat it. I didn't have a choice. The healthy part of me wanted to get better, but I knew that if I was given the freedom to choose, I wouldn't allow myself to get better. In this hospital, people were making me get better, and so it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my choice. I didn't want to leave because I knew as soon as I went home to the same environment where I'd gotten sick, that I would just continue the behaviors and that they would get worse and that I would end up back in hospital. And my grandparents actually offered to have me come and stay with them in England. A change of environment, a change of lifestyle, and they thought, my family thought it might motivate me to travel, to see new things, to meet new people. Bless them, it was a beautiful idea, but my grandparents were so unqualified to care for somebody with an eating disorder, and I went downhill, and I ended up in hospital, and they told me it would be 3 months before I got into a treatment facility for eating disorders. I didn't have 3 months to wait to get better, and so I thought, okay, the part of me that wants to get better has to do something. Part of me that imagined this. And so I begged my parents to bring me back to New Zealand, and my mum came to get me from England. My mum took me to New Zealand via France, and France was my first taste of something different. I decided that I was just gonna try, and my mum fed me like French sweets, and we stayed in hotels, and we went and took photos and lay on the beach and shared food with people, and it was normal. It was so different from what I'd been living in. And I went back to New Zealand. I went back to the same environment I'd been in, and I didn't get better. I didn't get better for a long time. For a while, I was able to not really get better, half-assed recovery. I went back to my old outpatient clinic, and they gave me a new therapist who was even more useless than the first therapist, and I discharged myself from the outpatient clinic. And my parents arranged to see a private psychiatrist who'd been working with eating disorders for something like 35 years. And he was incredible. His approach was completely no crap. You have to have the motivation somewhere in you to get better, and he would push that motivation out of me. And he gave me a calorie amount to make up, and I could make it up however I wanted. So instead of having a meal plan, I could now get creative with my food. I only used the calorie amount for the first little bit just to get my weight up. I don't really recommend having calorie goals involved, just because it encourages you to think about calories, and normal people don't think about calories. But it was really helpful for me at the start just to relearn how to eat normally and to learn how much a human body needs to eat. After a couple of years of eating disorder, I was now 16, I'd forgotten what eating normally looked like. And I started eating up to this amount, and if I didn't gain weight every single week that he weighed me, without exception, I was not allowed my phone, I was not allowed books, I was not allowed to see friends, I was not allowed TV, movies. I was just completely deprived of entertainment. I had a kick up the butt, and so I started to gain weight. It took a while, and I think I was in what's called quasi-recovery for a long time, which is half-assing recovery, eating enough to pass for recovering. And this was when I'd stopped using the calorie guidelines. I was eating enough to be eating and not be getting sicker, but I wasn't getting better. So I was in this holding pattern. And just to help with this, my metabolism sped up like a wildfire when I started eating again, because my body finally had nutrition. When you start eating again, after being in a calorie deficit for a long time, your body takes everything it can get from that food. So it takes all the nutrition, it takes all the calories, all the energy, and it just burns it. because it's repairing everything. It's repairing all your organs that didn't have enough nutrition. It's repairing all your muscles that have been shrinking and malnourished. It's repairing your things like your sight and your memory and rebuilding all your cells. And your body finally has the input to do all these jobs it's been putting off. And I wasn't putting on weight, even though I was eating a huge amount. That was difficult too, to be trying so hard and to feel like there was nothing coming out of it. But I was scared to take it a step further, which was still a sickness mindset. I wasn't willing to do what my body needed me to do. I knew I needed to do more. It actually took me going overseas. I was 17. I spent my entire 17th year working like a mad woman in a supermarket, saving money because I had a date. November 21st, I believe it was, at the end of that year, I had a flight booked to Europe. On that day, I could leave. I could go on an adventure. And I remember landing in Europe, in England, and just realizing it's on me now. I was still very underweight. I was eating a lot, and I'd gotten over the roadblocks in terms of eating. But I was still really skinny and my mind was still numb and foggy. If I mess this up, nobody's gonna help me. My mum's not gonna be there to catch me and make me eat my dinner. I've gotta make me eat my dinner. And so I went to stay with my family, my grandparents, for a couple of months, and I kicked myself. I just put everything in. I just went all in. I was still vegan. And this is something that I'll talk about in a later video, but veganism and recovery. But I was eating all the things, which is also another important thing. Eat all the things. Everything that your mind tells you not to eat, you've got to do it at least a couple of times. I finally put on weight and it was so good. My body finally had energy. I would wake up and I would feel awake. I would go and meet new people and I could talk to them. I could converse with them. And I finally started to see myself come back. It's like somebody just poured warm honey goodness into you and went, this is life. Welcome. And I started to think, what do I want to do with this life? I started to be interested in things other than food. Because when you're starving, all your brain can think about is food, and you scroll hours on Pinterest and Instagram looking at food porn and desserts and baking. It's an obsession. And finally, I wasn't thinking about food. I decided I was going to try being a nanny in France. So I went online, I looked on a nannying website, I found a family, I asked them if I could come nanny for them in France. And they said yes. And so I went to Paris and I started to learn French and I was a nanny. And I lived in a fancy mid-city apartment and they took me on holiday to Portugal. And it was just fabulous. And I ate what they cooked for me and it was completely out of my control. And I was responsible for another life, for a little girl, and I had to feed her. And I watched how much she loved food and how much energy and vibrancy it gave her, and it was so inspiring. And then I went doing work exchange. I was staying on organic farms and in little communities, doing building, festival organizing, growing food, learning French, and eating. So much eating. The French are so good at this. And they make amazing food. And they're not scared of anything. They eat chocolate and cheese and wine and meat and everything in abundance. And this was the turning point. After a few months in France, my little sister got quite sick. And I bought a return ticket immediately back to New Zealand. And I only intended to stay for a few months, but life is what it is. And I met a whole new group of friends in those few months, a fantastic community. I met a boy, I moved into my own little space, I started a new job, and life just unfolded and I got stuck back in New Zealand. And I began socializing with these beautiful people. I started making music. I went to my first festivals. I started going on adventures. I went off around New Zealand by myself in my car. I didn't care about my weight or my food or what people thought of me. If there's one thing that I want this story to tell you, it's that no matter what your eating disorder tells you, no matter how many promises it makes that when you're thin enough, you're going to be popular and beautiful and you'll have a boyfriend or girlfriend who just adores you and you'll have the best job and you'll get into university and you'll be perfect and you won't have any flaws and you'll be a fantastic human being and people will just admire you for miles around. It could not be further from the truth. It doesn't involve the eating disorder in any way. Throw that concept, that being, that part of your life as far away from you as you possibly can. My mission on this channel is going to be to help you do that. It's going to be eat your food. Food is fantastic. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's tough. It's really tough. But it's glorious. I'm going to put more out on this channel. I really want to help you guys with things that you're specifically wondering about. So if you have any questions, specific concerns, or things that are really important to you in this moment in your recovery, or you just want to have some help with them, put them down in the comments below and I'll try and make videos addressing those. That's it. Until next time I make a video, have a beautiful life and see you soon.